The value of being able to say no to things is really important. I just never appreciated that when I was first starting my career. But somebody pointed this out to me, which is like, once you start saying no to things tactfully, don't just say no to things indiscriminately. Once you start saying no to things with good reason, people really respect you a lot more because they appreciate the value of your time.
Welcome back, Wolfpack fans. We have part 2 today of our interview with Dr. Devin Hubbard. And if you listened last week, you know that he is a teaching associate professor at the UNC-NC State Lampe Joint Department of Biomedical Engineering. So 100% listen to the episode last week so that you can get caught up. But we need to start today with hearing a little bit of reflection, Devin, as you look back on your career. There's got to be something that you wish you would have known. Yeah. There's a lot of things I think I wish I would have known. Let me back up and just quickly say, I had no idea that I was going to end up where I am. And I think part of the reason that I ended up here is because I was just open to ideas and trying things out. So let me back up and say, when I was in graduate school, I was a TA for design in biomedical engineering. And that was one of the first times that I really fell in love with teaching. And to be clear, I always loved being part of sort of study groups and helping people, explain things. It just never clicked, right? I never clicked the idea that, I love teaching, I love mentoring. And then I was in grad school and I absolutely fell in love with teaching. I mean, I pulled more all-nighters in grad school helping students out in the design lab than I ever had in my entire life. So at the end of that, I was interviewing for a whole bunch of different things. I ended up in this teaching position, or I got an offer for a teaching position, which is where I am now. And before I started it, I was gathering advice. I went to some of my mentors and I just sat down and said, what are things that you would have wished you had known? And I talked to my mom. So my mom was an educator. She was a music teacher. And I asked her, I was like, when you first, what would you have told yourself? And she said, well, it's going to take you 3 years before you feel like you're comfortable doing your job. And I just that's such a weird thing to say, right? So the encoding of that is be patient because you're going to have to do a lot of learning. I was I already know how to teach. I don't know what I'm doing, right? 3 years too.
3 years.
That seems like, I always say 1 year, everything is new and you're just where's the bathroom? But did it take you 3 years?
Right. So this is what's funny to me is that sat in the back of my mind. Never really... I knew where everything was. I knew my students because I was in the same program already. I thought, what is there to learn, right? Which is extremely naive, right? And so, sure enough, on the summer before my third year, it wasn't even I was just sitting there going I feel prepared. Finally, for the first time, all my things are ready or organized. There's no major changes that I need to make. I've got everything entered in the system on time. I'm ready to go. And I was like, my mom was right. 3 years. And I was confident. I understood. And so, I'd say for the beginning, it was a year, took me a year to just learn basic stuff. But then after that, it was she had said, it'll take you 3 years to be comfortable in your job. And I totally agree with that. So, if I could give myself one piece of advice, it's not really that. It was just something that stood out to me. And for folks that are entering a new job, it's normal to feel a little imposter syndrome. It's normal to feel like you're not quite up to your colleagues. And, I had a non-traditional path, right? I didn't do a postdoc. And because of that, I looked at other colleagues that were entering tenure track jobs going should I have done that? I don't know. And I'm still confident that I made the right choice, but it just stood out to me as an interesting thing that it took me about 3 full years to be 100% dialed in for what I do. And I tell people that are interviewing for jobs, whether it's in industry and academia, the same thing. I say, it took me that long, and it may take you that long or longer or less, but just know there's going to be a period of time where you're going to do a lot of learning, and that's okay. But if I were to tell myself one thing, I think this would go all the way back to undergrad. I really do wish that I had appreciated the value of a network. I had all these great connections. I just never leveraged it. I had it didn't even cross my mind to talk to people I knew that were in places that I wanted to be until I was starting my career. And that's way too late. So I think I tell students, talk to the folks that you know in this classroom and get to know them. Because a year or 2 years from now, you're going to be able to go on LinkedIn and you're going to be able to see what they're doing. And you might go, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to call them up, which is just not a thought that ever crossed my mind at all. I mean, I had hundreds of friends from the chemistry department, right? Like, that's a huge program. And it wasn't until I was finishing grad school that I even thought maybe some of them are doing things that I might be interested in. So yeah, that's something that I think I wish I'd really embraced, was the idea of maintaining a network and being part of that too, like being willing to respond to people that are saying, hey, look, you're doing something kind of cool. How did you get there? Which, by the way, rarely happens. Anybody who's interested in teaching, I'm happy to talk to them, but I rarely get that. It's more like, if you want to have a good network, you should be part of the network too. So anyway.
I like that part of what you learned, Devin, just in terms of building those relationships and being intentional about it. I'm glad this listener can take that in. And just going back to that first couple years, can you just normalize some of the mistakes you made? I don't want to say failures because everyone's like, oh, yeah, when you fail, you're falling forward. But let's just be honest about the fact that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Okay. So like, I mean, there's really specific things, right? So for example, I take pride in the idea that I'm being fair to my students. I like to communicate with them. I like students to be able to come up to me and ask questions or suggest things that I can improve and not feel like there's any consequence to that. I don't think I did a great job of that in the first year that I taught. And it's not because I think I made myself inaccessible. I was teaching a course that I was well qualified to teach, but I'd never taught it before. I didn't think I was going to be teaching it. So I had to kind of put stuff together. And I'm so thankful I had wonderful colleagues who had taught this before and put a lot of material together. So thank you. In particular, Dr. Carty, she had designed this course. Anyway, I had an exam that I wrote, and I thought I was being clever on the exam. I wrote a question that I thought would draw from other courses that my students were taking. It had some advanced mathematics concepts, and we talked a little bit about it. And it was related to hearing, right? So it was like a math problem that basically asked my students, if you hear this type of delay between a sound reaching your two ears, where's the sound coming from? Now, the tricky part of this is the equations that you learn for doing this in the opposite direction are quite clear. It gives you an angle. But if you do the math in reverse, it gives you several answers. And I guess the point is the question was completely unfair. It required them to draw on very advanced mathematics topics, and only one person got the question right. And after that, I don't think my students really trusted that I was looking out for them. And so, I mean, I ended up throwing this question out. So that's one example of something that, like, I think I didn't align my objectives well with it. Separately, all the other mistakes, and these are things that everybody can make, right? Like just learning the system and doing things, like putting my foot in my mouth so many times where I like said something and didn't realize what I was saying, in the sense of, you might say something that is you're breaking the rules when you suggest this idea, but you don't know the rules well enough, right? So there were more than one time where I was like, well, why don't we just do it this way? And everybody looked at me like I had four heads, and I was like, what did I do wrong? And it would be like, well, you're not allowed to do that, right? This is, because of the policies. You're like, oh, whoops, I didn't know. And so I think there's a lot of that kind of learning. And again, it's easy to feel like you're an imposter, right? That sort of imposter syndrome when you're early on. So I have a lot of mistakes like that. And I'm thankful that I have really patient colleagues who have mentored people and have a lot of experience and could sort of educate me on the best practices. Other mistakes I made is I went into this assuming that I knew what I was doing, but I really didn't. And what I mean by that is I knew my material well. I didn't realize how much growth opportunity there was for me in the delivery of material. So I'm thankful again because I had wonderful mentors and colleagues that suggested, oh, you might want to take this course over the summer, or you might want to do this boot camp. And I did a wonderful boot camp that was hosted by NSF just on like pedagogical delivery and design. And it was a 1 week. At the end of that week, I was just like, oh, wow, I've been doing this wrong. Like, I have not been thinking through the way I deliver my material. So anyway, all that to say, I made a ton of mistakes, probably more than I can count. Most of them were because I just didn't know any better, or because, there was something that I should have known or looked up that I didn't realize was easily accessible. And again, like, that's just part of stepping into a new career.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to get in a little bit to your role as an engineer.
Sure.
And comparing that to being a teaching professor. What is one time when you found that you were torn between dedicating time to students and they say publish or perish, your lab, your research, and how did you reconcile it? Because it's hard to get everything done.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful that in my position, there's not a lot of pressure for me to publish. We do publish. And in some ways, it's funny because while the tension exists, I'm so excited about both. I'm really lucky to be in a position where I get to publish things that are exciting to me, almost exclusively exciting to me. So I just find the time to do it, right? It's like evenings and weekends if I have to. And I mean, I have small children too, so I try to balance that. But I think if anything, it's more like I would love to be able to dedicate more time to improving my classroom in some way, like fixing the materials or making it better every time. And there's just not enough hours in the day. And, we had an episode about wellness on the BME Grad podcast this past season. And Dr. Franz, who came on and talked about this, about the ideas of wellness and practices, brought up the idea of work-life equity, which is an interesting phrase that I had never really heard before, or at least never really discussed before. The idea is sometimes you have to dedicate a little bit more time to your family and take a little bit of time away from your work, and that's okay. And sometimes you have to dedicate a little bit more time in the week to work than you have time for family. But it's okay to borrow a little bit from each of those times as long as they balance out in the long run. I think that point was really well made, and it's something that I hadn't really thought about. But in this instance, right, like if I find myself in a position where I'm being asked to do something, or I feel like I need to do something that's sort of overwhelming or time consuming at work, I do the calculation in my head, not literally, but sort of think through how much time is this taking away from my family? And am I going to be able to borrow that back later on? And if the answer is no, then it's sort of, I've got to change my approach. If the answer is yes, then it's okay, right? Yeah, so I think for me, it's often, I'm often in a position where I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that better. But then there's a point at which there's diminishing returns, and you have to think through, like, is it worth it? And I think if you're in a corporate setting, it's sort of the same thing. So like there's deadlines, right? So you can't, sometimes you just have to make a decision, and you have to own the decision. So anyway, I don't know if I really answered your question.
I think you did, but when you said that about the equity, I want to add something, because as you talked about having young kids and people use the word balance, and then they're like, yeah, it's not really a balance.
Right.
So I think of it as what your values are so important. Like, is your family first? Is your work first? Or I also use the phrase a cycler, where you cycle back and forth between when your family needs you and when work needs you. But bottom line is, what do you want to be remembered by?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be thoughtful about that, right? Like if you're always working, you're going to be known as always working, right? And that's not, I mean, if that's what you want, great. But for me, that's not what I want, right? Like I like to dedicate myself to my work. I like to be passionate and thoughtful, and I have, like, in my head, it's like a very clear mission, right? My mission is to educate and to use my skills to better this world. It's pretty simple, but unpacking that is huge. And in my mind, the idea of balancing that with my family life and making it equitable is very important. I think I've learned a lot from my students on this subject, because I've had some students who are just really good at organizing their lives and their work so that they make time to be mindful and spend time, giving themselves time, dedicating time to their family. And one of the things, speaking of what would you go back and tell yourself, right? The value of being able to say no to things is really important. I just never appreciated that when I was, first starting my career. But somebody pointed this out to me, which is like, once you start saying no to things tactfully, don't just say no to things, indiscriminately. Once you start saying no to things with good reason and like really defending your time as valuable, people really respect you a lot more because they appreciate the value of your time. And I think that's really important. In fact, I was trying to figure this out a long time ago. I used to do a lot of consulting work. People would ask me, how much do you charge? Right? That's a hard question to answer, right? If you're in consulting, you've never done it before. You can ask other people, right? Like, how much do you charge? Well, somebody put it to me this way. They were like, well, it depends on when you're doing the work. Is this your 9 to 5? Because if it is, you should charge a 9 to 5 rate. But if this consulting work is happening outside of your normal job, people are now buying time away from your family and your friends and your personal time. And that costs more. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So for me, the ability to say no is very important. I try not to say no when I don't have to. But I also have become acutely aware of the fact that, like, if you say yes to everything, you just can't do a great job. You just can't.
I think when you talk about saying no, it ties back into what's important to you. And when you align your values with your actions, you are much more at ease. And as you've talked about working with these students, and I just want to get into generational thing because you said you've learned a lot from your students.
So much.
So what do you think about people's stereotypes of Generation Z? Do you see that?
You know, I have a hard time. So I really, I don't want to say I don't. I also think the idea of like defining a generation by a handful of activities just is totally, I don't subscribe to the idea that that's a good way of doing it. Are there general behaviors that are different between generations? Yeah, probably. And observably, yes. There's certainly things. Like one of my favorite ones is this, right? So call me. Like you and I probably do something like this. People that are born after me do this. Why? Because when we were growing up, phones did not look like a rectangle that you hold to your face, right? So like there's those kinds of things. Are there behaviors? I'm probably not well positioned to answer this. And the reason I'm going to say is because I think our students are wonderful and maybe a little bit of an exception in the sense that like they really are cognizant of their behavior, how it affects their potential for work. That being said, in the last 10 years, I have certainly seen a shift in some regards to explore better balance between what you do in work and what you're able to do outside of work. And I think that pendulum has swung a little bit further and come a little bit back. What I mean by that is, you know, there was a time, you know, I think about like Google's, right? Like the Google like workplace, it used to look like a playground. When I graduated college, it was like, I want to go to work for Google because, you know, or, you know, pick a company that was like really viewed as sort of progressive in their workplace. Like, oh, there's no set number of hours of vacation you can take. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, you can roll into the office whenever you want. Oh, that's interesting as long as you get your work done. So yeah, I think there's been some playing around with what workplace etiquette there is, but I also think it's important for students to appreciate that they don't get to set the rules all the time, and you have to be flexible. So some places are going to set the expectation that it's okay for you to do those things, and other places may not subscribe to that, and that's also okay. That being said, here's the thing that I think I would comment on where I saw the biggest change anecdotally, in my opinion, to students' professional skills. During the pandemic, when everybody was remote, it was so clear and obvious to me that the students who did not get that social interaction had a much harder time navigating the social professional environment. I even heard from the people that hired our students, they're like, what is wrong with these kids? And I don't mean to say that like disparagingly, like that, they were just sort of like, I don't understand. When I say you have to be at the office by 9 and they're rolling in at 9:30 and then messing around on their computers for half an hour, and then they get mad at me when I say, hey, you got to get to work. I don't understand that. And I think my hypothesis here is they just never had an opportunity to learn that because they were at home on their computers, and many of them just basically did college online. So they're effectively high school students socially. And I think it takes a little while to catch up. Now, this past year, which is the first year I think I've had students who have come through the university without any online courses, they're like back up to speed. No problems. I mean, just talking to them and interacting with them, they're just much more professional. And so if anything, I would say it's maybe less that I've observed generational differences, even though I think those do exist to some degree. I hate to sort of generalize and sort of stereotype based on that. I will say, however, that I think the pandemic extremely negatively affected those poor students who came through and didn't get the opportunity to like socialize in groups. They didn't really get the chance to navigate the complex social environment of college or even professional world until they were in it. right? And so what I think they felt was maybe considered an overreach in terms of ask is really just a normal ask in the professional world.
Yeah, I saw it too. It was cursed to be born in 2002 because that was the toughest time, really, to get through all of it. All right, so we're on our last question.
Yeah, sure.
Oh my goodness, time flew. So we're going to ask, this is a time machine twist. So if you could hop in a time machine and see the long-term impact of your work on one student's life, what would you like to see?
Yeah, this is a tough question. I think my answer might disappoint a lot of biomedical engineers. And the reason I say that is because nowhere in my answer am I going to mention engineering. I think it's really important for folks to explore and follow their passions and remain open to education and learning. Personally, I think it's important for people to help other people and to like leave this place better than you found it. So if I were to hop in a time machine and like capture a student, it doesn't matter if they're an engineer or if they're making medical devices or if they're off being a financial advisor or traveling, whatever they're doing. My hope would be that they've taken the skills that they've learned from our courses and from our mentoring interactions, and that they're using them to build a confident self who is respectful of others and respectful of themselves. And very, very importantly, that they're doing something to improve the world. So while that may seem like a low bar, that's really it. Like, I don't even have to be a memory in their mind. Like, I'm not the important part. The important part is what they leave our program with and what they leave their interaction with me having. Like, I want them to just be themselves and to do something great for the world.